This is the Retro Inc. podcast. Welcome back.
You are listening to the Retro Inc. podcast, a member of the Star Wars Commonwealth podcast network. Check out more from the Commonwealth at starwarscommonwealth.com and take your first steps into a larger world.
Welcome back to the Retro Inc. podcast, 1980, a year in retro. So, this is a new series of podcasts we're going to be doing where every now and again you're going to get a special from us. And we are going to review a year. And we're going to start 1980 and work our way all the way up to now. So, without further ado, let's do 1980, Adam. What a year it is to start on as well.
For me, I was 10 years old. The year 1980 represented The Empire Strikes Back and the must-have toy of that year.
Sure, Sir Isaac Newton unraveled the mysteries of gravity, but could he have unraveled the mysteries of Rubik's Cube? 3 weeks ago, Judge Smith retired to her chambers with Exhibit A, Rubik's Cube. She hasn't been seen since. Warning, once you get your hands on Rubik's Cube, you may never be able to put it down. Rubik's Cube, over 3 billion combinations, but just one solution from Ideal.
Rubik's Cube, puzzle toy, which debuted internationally during January at the Toy Fair in London, and the toy had been created by Erno Rubik in the 1970s. It was first painted as a magic cube back in Hungary in 1975, and the colourful puzzle was soon picked up by Ideal Toys, a US manufacturer, and they'd made things like Crossfire, and they'd made several sort of board games and things like that. So for them to pick this up and develop this toy for a global market was pretty huge. And after its introduction in the early part of 1980, the Rubik's Cube hit toy stores in May of that year. So this was definitely the toy to have for the summer. And by the following year, it was a huge success, calling of a worldwide craze. And I remember it being on TV shows, and competitions everywhere for who could solve the puzzle the fastest. And it still is a very popular toy today. I mean, for what it is, its simplicity and in its form, but it's multi-million ways of doing this, of this puzzle is just phenomenal. I mean, what a thing.
Isn't it billions of combinations of how quadrillions of combinations or something crazy like that, how this does. And even now these are so popular, and obviously we've done a bit of research for this episode, and I ended up stumbling down the rabbit hole on YouTube of watching Rubik's Cube competitions now, and there are some that are 17 by 17 and 34s by 34s, and there are some crazy big Rubik's Cubes out there. But
it also has some major celebrity fans. I mean, Justin Bieber's a huge fan of the Rubik's Cube.
And he is phenomenally good at it, isn't he?
Phenomenally fast, yeah.
Yeah, and to see some of these people do this, and I mean, I did actually once, because I was a bit into Rubik's Cubes at one point, and aside from taking the stickers off and putting them all on in the right places, I've never actually been able to finish one because of patience, and anyone who knows me knows I lack it. And it is so crazy to see these people do it in seconds. And when I was into it, I started looking at, there's actually a formula of how to do a Rubik's Cube, and if these people are remembering that formula, it is astounding that they can remember that amount of moves to get this cube back into place, because there is a certain way of doing it. But what a toy, man. I mean, even today, we're talking 38 years after its debut, and you can walk into any toy shop and still pick up one of these now. That's crazy.
It is crazy. Ideal were bringing out some fantastic toys at that, the particular time. Tin Can Alley, the electronic target shooting game, which had a simulated Winchester repeater rifle, which fired a harmless beam of light, which, when accurate, would send a tin can target flying into the air. And these tin cans sat on a sort of a plastic wooden fence. Now, I remember getting this thing for Christmas, and it was just phenomenal. And this was extremely lifelike rifle. I mean, it really was amazing. They also brought out another game called Crossfire, which was like a kind of football pitch with 2 metal goals, and you had a gun that fired these ball bearing pellets, and you had to hit a larger ball bearing with like a plastic ring around it, which was on the center. And you had to fire your pellets and try and get in your opponent's goal. Ideal brought out some fantastic games that year. Palatoy, of course, were bringing out electronic games as well as bringing out Action Man and Star Wars toys. Games like Blip was very big. And we also had Mattel bring out electronics such as soccer. And they also brought out Battlestar Galactica electronic game and Auto Race. Palatoy brought out something called Blip, which was a tennis game, and it was just very similar to Pong, pretty much. There was Intercept as well, which was made by Action GT, which was a little bit like sort of battleships, I suppose. And also there was a lot of great looking stuff like Starbird, which was made by MB. Now, do you remember the Starbird toy at all?
That's the 2 ships, isn't it? You can make them battle with lasers. Am I correct?
You could do that. There was MB brought out electronics computer battleship game. MB brought out Simon, which is still extremely popular to this day. Starbird was an amazing spaceship with realistic engine sounds, simulated acceleration and deceleration, and featuring flashing laser guns. This retailed at $13.99. Now, this would have been, if this came out to now, about £90.
Yeah.
MB also brought out Twister, Operation, Connect 4, Yahtzee, Stay Alive, and Perfection, and those games were huge at Christmas. Buckaroo was also extremely popular, and Jaws, Mousetrap, and Kaplunk. Did you ever have Kaplunk or any of those games?
Oh, I did, mate. I still have a Kaplunk sitting in my house now.
If you were lucky, you would have got Super Striker by Peter Pan Playthings, and Hungry Hippos was also released by Palatoy that year. If you were a lucky young boy, you would have perhaps got by Ideal as well, TCR. TCR was a racing track game, a bit like Scalextrics, and really extremely fast. Lego was still bringing out some fantastic toys, and of course, back then, one of their larger toys, for example, like their basic sets and their space cruisers, were around the £16 mark. Now, you would only just get a very small little set for that price. Back then, you could get the police base. I mean, it just shows you that the price of oil has really increased the price of plastic. But in 1980, along with getting a lot of Empire Strikes Back toys for myself, one toy that I was really thrilled about getting was made by Ideal, and it was the Evel Knievel Stunt Cycle. Gyro powered, it would do wheelies, mid-air, somersaults, and much more if you could build yourself a little ramp. Fantastic toys, mate. Really super awesome. Also in that year, there was some extremely sad news. Former Beatle John Lennon is shot to death.
John Lennon is dead, shot several times by a young American as he was going into his home in New York. The former Beatle, who was 40, was returning home from a recording studio with his wife, Yoko Ono, when he was murdered. It was just before 11 o'clock last night when they were entering the luxury Dakota apartment building on New York's west side. The attacker, named by police as David Chapman, aged 25, from Honolulu, shot Lennon with a revolver after an argument. Mrs. Lennon called for help. Residents in the building came to her aid. Mrs. Lennon accompanied her husband to hospital, but he was dead on arrival. Crowds quickly gathered outside the apartment block as news of the murder spread. Some among them said the arrested man had been hanging around the building for some days.
Now, this is a biggie, isn't it? It's obviously one of the greatest bands, the most influential bands that ever walked this earth, the Beatles, and they hadn't been together for quite some time at this point, had they? But this was a popular musician and Beatle, John Lennon. He was shot and killed by the obsessed fan Mark David Chapman outside Lennon's apartment in Manhattan during December of 1980 at a very young age of 40 years old. This guy, I think, if this hadn't happened, I think he would be very influential to this day.
Yes.
I think that Lennon would still be at the forefront of popular culture. I think he would be an advocate of so many good things, and he would be so important to this. You hear these people sometimes and they say when they die they leave more of a mark than if they'd have survived. I don't believe that with Lennon in the slightest. I think you hear through their music a progression and a change on every album, and I would have been so enthused to see what 30, 40 years would have brought with Lennon, because I think he would still be making music now. We could have even got a Beatles reunion at some point, but I mean, to me, this is such a strange one, isn't it? Chapman was supposed to be a big fan, and I don't understand the workings inside a man's mind, or a person's mind for that matter, male or female, that can go down this route. I mean, it was only earlier that day that he'd got a autograph of John Lennon, wasn't it, in a crowd? There's
That's right.
Pictures out there that you can see of Chapman getting the autograph off of Lennon
There's a photograph of that.
Yeah, and so he was returning home from a recording with his wife Yoko, and yeah, this is, I mean, something that even now is so poignant in popular culture, isn't it? Along
with the news of Princess Diana's death, I remember the news vividly of John Lennon, as well as Elvis Presley. But someone who's visited New York many times and been to the area, the Dakota Building, and stood holding hands with people around the Imagine area that's in Central Park, it really, really brought home that this man was so beloved and such a talent and a lover of peace, and would have been very profoundly important to world politics today. And it could well be, if some conspiracy theories are led to believe, that Mr. Chapman was put up to get rid of this very peaceful man, as perhaps even Mr. Bob Marley was as well.
Yep.
Other news around that time was the Iraq War, I believe.
Iraq-Iran War started in 1980 as well. Yep. We also, in 1980, on a lighter note with TV, we had the Who Shot JR storyline. So millions of viewers tuned in worldwide to find out who shot JR. And do you know what? I don't actually know who did it personally, because I couldn't care, because I'm not a fan of Dallas or.
I would like to think it was Sue Ellen, his wife, his deranged and slightly estranged wife, or should I have said the estranged and slightly deranged wife. TV shows of that time were around, just not from the past, but there were some new shows too. Doctor Who was still thriving. Grange Hill, which was based around a children's school. Blue Peter, Top of the Pops, which was the must-watch if you're into music, which was always at Thursday around 7 o'clock at that time. Tiz was on a Saturday morning. Benny Hill Show was still going. Rent-A-Ghost, The Goodies, and not the 9 o'clock news, with a very young Rowan Atkinson, who later on played Mr. Bean. And, of course, The Muppet Show. And in the US, there was MASH and Taxi, Happy Days, The Jeffersons, Different Strokes, Mork and Mindy, and Dukes of Hazzard, and of course the Sesame Street characters. I loved all of those, and as we didn't have so many channels as we do today, TV was hugely important, as it was before that in the 70s. We had some fantastic movies that came out that year.
Oh, the movies of 1980. Yeah. Well, I mean,
starting with The Empire Strikes Back, which is the top of all of those in my personal opinion.
Well, yeah.
Superman 2.
Yep, Superman 2.
9 to 5 with Dolly Parton.
The Shining.
The Shining. Raging Bull.
Raging Bull. Airplane.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Friday the 13th.
Flash Gordon.
Blues Brothers.
The Elephant Man. Popeye. Altered State.
Oh, that is such a good film.
It's a great movie.
I love it.
The Fog.
What a year for movies.
Stir Crazy.
Oh,
Smokey and the Bandit 2. And one of my young sort of childhood crushes starring... I'm just not even going to say her name. But she starred in a movie called Xanadu with music from ELO. There was the Cheech and Chong next movie, which was obviously too old for myself. Herbie Goes Bananas. There was the Fame movie, which came out alongside the TV series. There was the Big Red One, which was a black and white war movie starring the one and only Mark Hamill. There was Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And there was Battle Beyond the Stars.
Ruthless invaders, a defenseless planet. Battle beyond the stars. A lone youth escapes on a last-ditch mission that begins at the edge of the universe. The story of a boy who finds more than he expected. And all he can handle.
Does your species have kissing?
Oh, yes. We have that. Try one. That's a hot dog. It comes from Earth. Do you like it? There's no dog in this. Soybean meal, niacin, dextrose, and sodium nitrate flavoring. That's what we call meat back home.
Battle beyond the stars. Starring Richard Thomas, George Papard, Robert Vaughn, John Saxon. A battle beyond time, beyond space.
Nice fire!
That ends in a desperate gamble.
They'll be able to board us.
It won't make any difference. Get that hatch open!
Battle beyond the stars.
What a year for movies, mate.
It was fantastic, wasn't it?
Wasn't it just? I mean, some of those we've said there are movies. They are timeless classics that people still revere today. Empire Strikes Back, The Shining, Friday the 13th, Airplane, Indiana Jones. They are...
You've got to have those films in your collection.
Yeah, and they're films that everyone has seen. These are films that if you say to someone,
the Blues Brothers,
I hate using the term millennial, but if you said to a millennial Friday the 13th, they know what you're talking about. If you say The Shining, they know here's Johnny. Everyone knows. They are quotable pieces of
greatest films. Raging Bull.
Yeah, love him or hate him, or whether it's your cup of tea, that's a good film. And Airplane is one of those. The comedy now doesn't ring for me that well, but
it's funny. It's very funny.
Even lines like "Don't call me Shirley," I still quote this now.
You're using romantic. These quotes don't sound right unless you're watching that film.
Yeah, and
the scene in the plane where the person is having a panic attack. And the doctor says, I'll deal with this. And he tries to say, pull yourself together. And then there's someone behind them with a baseball bat, some of them with a machine gun. One dressed as a boxer.
I mean, that's that Lampoon
There's a nun. It's
style
Lampoon
comedy,
style,
isn't it?
yeah.
Of, you know, we had it with Leslie Nielsen and the Hot Shots films. They wouldn't, you know, the Naked Gun movies with these wouldn't exist without Airplane. This is what started that silly.
It all came off the back from Police Squad in colour, starring Leslie Nielsen. Now that TV series was so very, very funny. It completely spooned TV cop shows, but again, you know, we've got Precinct 99, I think, is it called, on 99, which again is
Brooklyn
a very similar...
Nine-Nine.
Thank you. Yeah,
and all these things wouldn't exist without this. I don't.
They wouldn't indeed.
No.
We wouldn't be gaming the way we do if it wasn't for arcade machines. And in 1980 was the birth of probably one of the greatest arcade games ever.
That little yellow dude with the drug obsession. Yeah, we're chasing his demons. It's so metaphorical, this game, it hurts. But Pac-Man.
Wow.
1980 was a year.
Also, after Pac-Man, there was another arcade machine called Missile Command. Did you ever play Missile Command?
I have, mate, yes.
With a trackball?
Yep.
Fantastic. Centipede?
It's hard. Centipede
was extremely difficult. I always found that a very hard game to play. Battlezone. Do you remember Battlezone?
With the tanks?
That's right.
Yeah.
When those graphics were very Tron-like, weren't they?
Yeah.
Rally X, Wizard of War, Berserk.
Nice.
Phoenix, one of my favourite games. Mooncrester, Zork the Great.
Zork, brilliant. Can we invent a time machine and go back to 1980, please?
We'd need a lot of old 10p's, wouldn't we?
That's fine.
That's the thing.
That's fine. When you think about, you know, if we get, 50 quid.
Yeah.
Convert that to old money.
And a better way. Now, what we need is we need to go into a shop that would sell parts for a Flymo. Now, Flymo, I don't know if you can still buy Flymos. They're lawnmowers. They had these strimmers. They were like plastic thread that had a disc on the end.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same size as a 10p.
Right.
So you had this plastic disc the size of a 10p with a little piece of plastic string on the end of it. Now, guess what you could do with that?
Well, now, do you know what? I want you to apologise because you made me feel bad for downloading from certain places the audiobooks of The Hitchhiker's Guide. Now, what you're doing is a lot more heinous. You're doing it in front of the people there, aren't you?
I apologise for my 10-year-old behaviour. But I used to go to Pontins holiday camp, and the reason for that was we had a personal friend who worked there, and I brought along one of these little objects, and I popped it in the coin slot, and I popped it in, and I pulled on this little red string and pulled the coin out, and I got loads of credit.
Nice.
Yeah, that's how I got to play a lot of games.
Good man.
Call a misspent youth. Also in arcades and certainly in holiday camps, which were a really big thing back in 1980, you would have a jukebox, and on that jukebox would be bands like, now prepare yourself because there is some amazing music.
So much it hurts, actually, yeah.
So these are probably the most popular musicians of 1980. ABBA, AC/DC, Adam and the Ants, Black Sabbath. Blondie had this massive hit with Call Me this year. David Bowie with Ashes to Ashes. The Cars with Drive. Eric Clapton, Alice Cooper, Elvis Costello, Casey and the Sunshine Band, Michael Jackson, of course, and Queen with another one, Bites the Dust, was a huge hit. Pink Floyd, Diana Ross with her hit Upside Down. Paul McCartney, Olivia Newton-John with Magic, Electric Light Orchestra. David Bowie, of course, and The Police with Sting. And wow, top 10 hits of that year, or I suppose the hits of that year were Joy. Now this is an incredible list because there is a band that got quite a lot of hits in this year, and it was by Joy Division, and the Love Will Tear Us Apart was a huge hit of this year. The Jam's Going Underground, The Beat, Mirror in the Bathroom, Joy Division again with Atmosphere, David Bowie's Ashes to Ashes.
This just sounds like my record collection.
Well, it certainly was part of mine when I was buying 45. Bow Wow Wow, Grace Jones's Private Life, Fashion by David Bowie, and Stevie Wonder's Master Blaster. Now, for a kid of 10, I think I'd probably not quite got a paper round, but I was certainly walking into shops and picking up Star Wars figures at 99p, which was the same price as a 45 single. And so that was the one thing that you bought was single tracks with an A and a B side, and you'd get just as good a B side as you would an A side. What else did you find interesting about this particular year? Because one particular toy I want to talk about, and I did post this on our Facebook page, was a toy called Big Track.
Oh, the Big Track. I love this thing, mate. Absolutely phenomenal little toy.
It's retailed at around £35. It was like a tank with 6 wheels, and it had a track around it like a tank. It was programmable to go in whatever direction you wanted to go with sound effects. And it was just a great thing to have, because you could buy a trailer for this and you could send this to your brother's room with a note on it. Can I have my land speeder back? And he would write a note saying,
this
no.
sounds all too true, this story.
And program it back with the note on it.
Wow.
It was a fantastic.
Yeah, I didn't own one of these, but my best friend growing up, and it was a girl, we called her George, her name was Georgina. She was my best friend growing up. She lived in the house at the back of mine, and I used to be around there all the time. And her dad, he was, he's one of those family friends. I called him an uncle. I grew up, and he was very much like me. He liked getting crafty, making things in the woodworking shed. We built model aeroplanes together, radio controlled aeroplanes and things, and he was a big old geek, and he had the Big Track, and me and my friend George, we sat there for hours playing with this thing. We'd program it, like you say, to drive around the room and come back to you, and it was so much fun, this thing. And I remember when going around there for the first time that he got it, and we played with it for a good couple of hours, and I remember all I wanted to do when I went home that day was I kept asking Mum, when we going around again, because I just wanted to get my hands back on that Big Track and have a play with it. And £35 back then was a lot of money.
Well, £35 now, £40 now is what you can actually still pick up a Big Track for.
Crazy.
And if you go to our affiliate link on retroinkpodcast.co.uk, you can click on that link and take you straight to Amazon and purchase one.
Yep.
Now, gaming. The Atari Video Computer System. The use of the microprocessor circuitry allows many varied and complex games to be played on this machine. You can even challenge the computer. It actually wins, and usually wins. Each cartridge instructs the computer to display a totally different game, which can have as many as 50 variations. Wow. Each unit comes complete with one 27-game cartridge, combat, 2 sets of remote controllers, mains adapter unit, and aerial switch box, built-in sound and timer systems, and on-screen scoring. Operates from a 240 AC mains through an AC adapter, which is supplied, thank goodness. Now, the recommended retail price for an Atari was £179.95 in January. So after Christmas, that year when this was released. By Christmas, the end of 1980, it was £139. Now, cartridges for this system were available as follows. You had Basketball, 2 games on that. You had Outlaw, 16 games on that cartridge. Air Sea Battle, which had 27 games, and Video Olympics, which had 50 games. And each cartridge retailed at £14.79. You also had another system, which was the Binatone photocell electronic gun and console. Now, the electronic gun enabled target games to be played, and this was available for £3.99. There was the Ingersoll system, but firstly, the Binatone 4+2 black and white video game. So, whilst Atari was releasing a machine that was in colour, Binatone was releasing one in black and white. Woo! That was for the cheapskates, because this little system. Now, this is where you get a huge difference in price. This system connects to the aerial socket of your TV, enabling you to play tennis, squash practice, or football. Optional handgun available separately at $3.99. Allows two further target games to be played. Remote control levers and built-in sound system suitable for most color or monochrome 625 line UHF TV sets, but display will only appear in black and white. Not to be used on pipe TV systems or TVs without tuning control. Operates from 6 HP2 batteries. Order 6 for 21 pence, or a 9-volt AC adapter available separately. Now, this system retailed at £10.99. £10.99 for a
Madness.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So later on, they brought out a 4+2 color video game console. Now, how much do you think the color version was?
$12.99.
So this one also connected to your aerial socket of your television,
Wow.
and you could still play this on suitable color or monochrome TVs, and it retailed for $15.99.
Not far off.
Not far off. How amazing! Along with those games, if you're a football fan, you had Striker. Now, Striker was a great football game. It was called Super Striker, and it comprised of the Wembley fast pitch, 8 kicking figures, 2 diving goalkeepers, goals and nets. The length was 33.5 inches long, and it retailed at $11.49. Now, I loved this game, and I played for hours. Subbuteo was obviously available at that time. You could also get cricket too. Both of these games were by Peter Pan. But for a West Ham fan of 1980, it was the FA Cup final. Now, West Ham United played Arsenal at Wembley. Now, West Ham were in what was then known as the second division, and we didn't have a Premiership then. So Arsenal, first division winners, and West Ham played them in the FA Cup, and West Ham won with a Trevor Brooking header.
And in more interesting sporting news, Wimbledon that year. Because for the more cultured Retro Inc. listener, there's better sports out there. But that was the year Bjorn Borg won at Wimbledon.
Was this his first win?
I'm not 100% on that, but in the US tennis, it was John McEnroe. So we are talking an era of greats there as well.
I vividly remember a Wimbledon final between McEnroe and Borg. Now, I watched the final between McEnroe and Borg with headphones on, listening to Jeff Lynne's War of the Worlds. Now, how weird do you think that was? Listen to War of the Worlds whilst watching the Wimbledon final.
It's amazing. Is it one of those things that synced up perfectly? Yeah.
It did. But it's very, very surreal. And I was only 10, so I wasn't sipping anything or smoking anything, but it was extremely strange.
We've done sports. I think we've covered sports. Books from 1980. Now,
I have a guess of one particular book.
Let's go.
Now, does it mention? Can you mention the name Adrian Mole?
It doesn't actually. No, but did Adrian Mole come out that year?
I don't know. I was just having a guess.
Oh no, but we have Robert Ludlum's The Bourne Identity, debuted in 1980. So that is some time before that got picked up as a movie, isn't it? Cosmos by Carl Sagan. We've got Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card.
That really?
Yeah.
Wow. That was some time before that got picked up as well.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's the whole series, isn't there, of the Enders books. Unfortunately, Orson Scott Card is a massive bigot and racist, so I don't actually like giving him any money.
Okay.
But aside from that, we have The Devil's Alternative by Frederick Forsyth.
Oh, fantastic book.
Firestarter, Stephen King. God Emperor of Dune by Frank Herbert. Jailbird by Kurt Vonnegut. Smiley's People, John le Carre. It's, again, I mean,
what a list of books.
It is, isn't it? You know, Midnight's Children, Salman Rushdie. This is an era of prolific writers, prolific directors, creators. It's what a year, man. 1980 was, and not only that, we got the Post-it note,
and we're still using those today.
But
I mean, whether you've got the Post-it notes stuck on your wall or your screen, you can now have your Post-it notes sticky on your MacBook.
Yeah,
in digital form.
It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, like you say, joking aside, and I say that with all the best intentions of a joke, but Post-it notes, they are again a brand where if I said to you, get me some notepad, you'd go, oh, what do you need? If I said, get me some Post-it notes, you'd get me some Post-it notes, wouldn't you? You know what that is. They are iconic in themselves. They're great for playing japes on co-workers and filling their office up with Post-it notes. They are, like you say, they're even in the digital format now, where you slap one on your screen and it's a Post-it note. And they are, what is it, 3M, the company that make them?
Yeah, 3M.
Yeah. And I mean, it's still them now, still them creating essentially the same product, like a Rubik's Cube. 40 years later, you don't need to change the design of something so simple that works so perfectly. And
well, I mean, how many parties have you been to where someone got the twister out?
Yeah.
I mean, you can buy now Operation with R2-D2, but, you know, really, what a year. And I think we, you know, but if any of you guys were around in that time, you'd probably been the same age as myself, roughly, give or take a year. And the 80s were, you know, looked upon in some respects as being a quite distasteful year. There was a lot of bad fashion, but with up-and-coming groups that we will talk about on the forthcoming years, little did we know what was coming round the corner. And certainly
now
Spielberg was working very hard with his movies to come.
The thing is with the 80s, and we're starting 1980 here because it's a good place to start, and it's a good year to start. But I've always said this, and you say this about the fashion of the time. In my eyes, the 80s is the last iconic era that is definable by fashion and music and just its general culture. You go into the 90s, and yes, we have the rave culture and we have things like this, but there's nothing defining of the 90s and the noughties in a way that the 80s is. You talk about, if I said to you, neon hair and electro music, and you'd know I was talking about the 80s, and you can see someone dressed and you know they're a picture from the 80s, and you can still have that from the 90s. I understand that there's fashion choices, but we lampoon it now, and we copy that now. People pick up those style choices from the 80s because it is so iconic. It's one of the last, in my eyes, last iconic eras that there is.
Ask somebody in their 20s, 30s or 40s, what would you say is retro? They would say the 80s.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
And let's be honest, the reason why we do this podcast begins because of this era, because of this decade. This is where our love comes from. Now, I know Star Wars started in 77, but the main bulk of everything I hold close to my heart, I mean, I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 83, so when we get to that, which is the best year there is, because obviously I was born then, so I grew up through this, and I hold a lot of it dear to my heart. And I know some of it is cheesy, and I'm not an ABBA fan, but there's no denying the impact that these people have now. And it was a crazy year, man. 1980, absolutely crazy.
Well, I remember going through my dad's record collection, and I still have the boxes of those albums now. I mean, albums like Back in Black. You know, just think of all those hits that came from that particular album. I mean, ABBA are getting back together to do a rather large gig. I don't think they're going to be there in person. I think they're going to do the whole hologram idea. But those artists that we mentioned, they're still around today. Prince also brought out an album called Dirty Mind. This was also 1980, and he, at this point, he was touring with the Rolling Stones and was actually booed off stage when he got on it. Because I don't think the world was quite ready for Prince. But, musically, with home entertainment, with the VHS player, and VHSs which you obviously had to go and hire from the local shop, it was the beginning of our awakening, I would say.
Now, I do have a comprehensive list here, if you're interested, of all the Billboard #1 hit songs from 1980 in order. And I'm not going to do dates because back then there wasn't a new song on the top of the charts every week, every other week. As we full well know, some of them could last a month or so, couldn't they?
They were there for a long time.
Yeah, but so we'll start the year off with Escape, the Pina Colada song by Rupert Holmes. Please Don't Go by Casey and the Sunshine Band. Rock With You, Michael Jackson, which for me is one of his best songs. Do That To Me One More Time, Captain and Tennille. Crazy Little Thing Called Love, Queen. Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2, Pink Floyd. Call Me, Blondie. Funky Town, Lip Sync. Coming Up, Paul McCartney and Wings. It's Still Rock and Roll to Me, Billy Joel. Magic, Olivia Newton-John. Sailing, Christopher Cross. Upside Down, Diana Ross. Another One Bites the Dust, Queen. Woman in Love, Barbra Streisand. Lady, Kenny Rogers. And Just Like Starting Over by John Lennon. Wow.
There's a few songs there that I remember going to the telephone and dialing 16. And when you dial 16, you could listen to a hit song from the top 40. And you'd have the music playing down your telephone. Now, it would cost you about 20p to listen to the song. So you couldn't listen to the full song because your parents wouldn't allow that. So you could just listen to the first sort of like 20 seconds of it. And I remember dialing it up and hearing Casey and the Sunshine Band and Starting Over by John Lennon. And Lip Sync Funky Town was a huge single for me to have on my dance set record player. Which you could load about 6 singles maximum, and as each single finished, the next one would drop down and the needle would play the next one. It was a fantastic year, and really was a year of my awakening, because Empire Strikes Back woke me up to a very different type of film, one that had a lot more myth and legend than I was ever used to. And certainly after being such a massive Thunderbirds fan, and then starting to put on the TV and watching things like Dukes of Hazzard, and seeing American TV shows, which was really starting to hit at that point. Taxi was a huge hit, and certainly my parents stayed up quite late to sort of watch that. And this starred Danny DeVito, Happy Days with Ron Howard and the Fonz. Hey, just wonderful. Different Strokes was always on, as was Morecambe Mindy with the wonderful late. Goodness me.
I'll let you have it.
Robin
Williams.
I was, it was less of the name and more the fact that this man gave us such wonderful movies and was such a thrill to watch and listen to, and actually I got a little bit emotional just conjuring up his name, to be honest.
Yeah. Do you know what? Robin Williams is one of the all-time greats, and it's sad, isn't it, when you can have someone so funny and you don't realise the pain inside. And it's obviously a massive defence mechanism sometimes for what they're truly feeling. But there's no denying, sadness aside, the joy that man brought to this world. And like you say, even with something like Morecambe Mindy, the effect it has on popular culture, where if I walked up to someone and said, Nanu, Nanu, they know who it is. They may not know even where it's from, but they know that reference, and it was a joy to see him in that role, and it's something I grew up watching. I know I'm a few years behind you, but again, I was born in 83, and Mork and Mindy was still as popular when I was 5 or 6 years old as it was back then. Yeah, so
thank you very much for listening to this year in retrospective. I thoroughly enjoyed doing the research. I don't know about you, mate, but it was a real flashback for myself. I'm still looking at some toys on my shelf now from 1980. I've never really grown up.
I'm sure there's a lot we've missed as well from 1980, and if anyone knows anything we have missed, chuck it our way. We'll talk about it on the main show, so we do have pickups there. Yeah,
but very much looking forward to moving this forward from now. Yeah. Thanks very much. I've been Adam.
And I've been Andy. Thank you very much.
This was 1980.
This has been a Retro Inc. podcast production. Go to our website retroincpodcast.co.uk. Join us on Twitter, Instagram, the Retro Inc. Facebook page and the Retro Inc. YouTube channel. Alternatively, you can find us and many other podcasts at StarWarsCommonwealth.com. Podcasts such as Talk Star Wars, Tumbling Saber, The Nerd Room, Generation X-Wing, Rogue Squadron, San Diego Sabres Radio Podcast, Skyhawks Podcast, Tatooine Sons Podcast, Less Than 12 Parsecs Podcast, and of course,